The first time my children argued over the house, I was still sitting at the table. I had not gone anywhere. I was right there, coffee in front of me. Same chair I have sat in for 30 years. And for a second, I felt like I was already in the folder. Not sick, not gone, just somewhere they had already moved past. It started the way those things usually start. Somebody made a joke. One of them said something like, well, someday this old place will be mine anyway. Said it light. Said it with a little smile, the way you do when you want the door to open, but you do not want to be the one who opened it. I let it sit. I did not say anything right away because I am not someone who jumps at a small thing. I thought, all right, that was just talk. People say things. But it did not stay small. Somebody else came back at it. Not agreeing, not laughing it off, coming back at it. Like the door had opened and they both walked through. And I sat there. I picked up my coffee. I looked at the table. I have known that table a long time, and I remember thinking, clear as anything, nobody in this room is yelling. Nobody is being cruel. This is just a normal dinner. That was the part that was hard to name. What bothered me was that no one sounded cruel. They sounded practical. And somehow that made it harder to stop.
Still sitting at the table, and the conversation kept going.
It kept going. Around me, mostly. I was there in the room, but I was not really in the conversation anymore. It was not a fight yet. It was more like a negotiation that nobody had announced. And the strange thing is, when nobody is yelling, you start to question yourself. You think, maybe I am reading this wrong. Maybe this is just how families talk now. But I knew what I felt. I felt like the house had stopped being the place I lived and started being the thing I would leave. And I was still in it.
There is something harder about a quiet moment like that than a loud one.
Much harder, because with a loud one, you know where you stand. With a quiet one, you sit there wondering if you imagined the whole thing. But I did not imagine it.
When you say the house had become something to leave rather than somewhere to live, what does that mean to you? What was that house before that dinner table became painful?
That house was 30-some years of my life. I bought it when I had nothing extra to spare. Took everything I had saved. Everything. I was not from money. I built a small business. I put away what I could. And when I found that house, I thought, this is the thing I can give them. Not a fortune. Not a name they could trade on. Just something solid. Something theirs when they needed it. I remember signing the papers and thinking, all right, this is the part that lasts. We raised a family in that house. Every ordinary thing happened there. Bad winters. Graduations nobody felt like celebrating. The regular grief. The regular good. That house held all of it. When I sat at that dinner table, that is what I was sitting in the middle of. Not a piece of property. Not a number on a form. Everything I had spent my life trying to hold together.
And at that table that night, something shifted.
Something shifted. I do not know exactly when. But by the time dinner was over, I had a feeling I had not had before. I wanted to leave them something. I had always wanted that. That had not changed. But I did not want to leave them a war.
Before that night, had you ever thought of the house that way? As something that might divide them rather than hold them?
No, that thought had never crossed my mind. I guess I believed that what I had built would speak for itself, that when the time came, they would remember what the place meant. That night made me wonder if I had been wrong about that.
Tell me about the house, not the argument, just the house. What did it feel like to first walk through that door and know it was yours?
I remember the first morning I woke up in it. The light came in a particular way. I had not noticed it the day we moved in, but that first morning, it came through the front window at an angle, and it fell across the floor in a way that just stopped me. I remember thinking, this is mine. Even the morning felt different. I know that sounds strange, but that is how it felt. For a man who grew up without much, that meant something I could not have put into words at the time. It still means something. What stayed with me was not just the light. It was waking up in a place that was yours. Not rented, not borrowed. Not something you were going to have to give back at the end of the month. Mine. That word meant something different when I was younger than it does now. I grew up without a lot. My father worked hard, and it still was not enough most of the time. So when I bought that house, I was not thinking about what it would be worth someday. I was thinking about what it would feel like to come home to something solid.
You built your business around the same time.
Around the same time, yes. Nothing big, a small repair and service operation. I had a few guys working with me at the peak of it. Some years were better than others. I would get up early, open the shop, come home tired, and that house was there. Every time. You learn to trust a place when it keeps showing up like that. And I wanted my children to have that feeling. That is really what it was about. Not the square footage, not what some agent might say it was worth on a Tuesday afternoon. I wanted them to have something that kept showing up.
Did you talk to them about that? About what you were trying to give them?
Not in so many words. I thought they could see it. You know how you think some things are just understood? I figured they watched me go to work, watched me come home, watched me fix what needed fixing in that house, and they knew. Maybe I was wrong about that. Maybe I should have said it out loud more.
Tell me about the mortgage folder.
I still have it, old Manila folder. Corners worn down. I have kept every paper in it since the day we closed on the house. The original loan documents, payment records, the letter from the bank the year we paid it off. I pulled it out a while back. After everything started feeling different, I do not know exactly why. I just wanted to hold something that went back to the beginning. The payment records in there, some of them are handwritten. My handwriting, month after month, year after year. I sat there looking at it and I thought, this is what the house cost. Not the number on the bottom line, this. Every one of these. That folder is 30-some years of mornings going to work and choosing that house over something easier.
When did it start to feel like your children saw it differently?
It crept in. That is the honest answer. It was not one day where everything changed. It was a series of small things that I kept telling myself were nothing. The first time I remember noticing, one of them made a joke. We were all together, somewhere around the holidays, easy mood in the room. And out of nowhere, one of them said something like, well, someday this old place is going to be mine anyway. Said it smiling, said it light. I smiled back. Because what do you do with that? You smile. But I felt something right then, something I did not have a name for yet.
What did it feel like?
Like the floor shifted just slightly under me, not enough to fall, just enough to notice. I told myself it was a joke, I let it go. But I did not forget it.
Did it stay a joke?
For a while it felt like one. Then it started showing up in other ways. Different tone, different angle, but the same thing underneath. One of them started making comments about the upstairs. You do not even use it anymore. You could close off that whole half of the house and not notice. Said practically, said like a reasonable observation, but I use the upstairs. Or I do not use it the way I used to, maybe, but it is my upstairs. I have things up there. It is part of my house. When someone starts telling you which parts of your house you still need, that is a different kind of conversation than they may think they are having.
What did you hear underneath it?
I heard them already mapping the place, like they were walking through it in their heads and figuring out what fit where, what they would keep, what they would not. And I was still living there, still coming downstairs every morning, still sitting in my chair. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself they were just talking. But you know when something is talking, and when something is something else. You learn that over a long life.
Was there a moment when the accounting started? When it stopped being talk and started feeling like something more concrete?
Yes. One of them mentioned some work they had helped with, roof repairs a few years back, money they had put in. Now that did happen. They did help, and I was grateful for it. I told them so at the time. But the way it came up in the conversation, it was not offered like a memory. It was offered like a line item, like they were keeping a record, like there was a balance sheet somewhere that I did not know about. That was the one that bothered me the most, I think, because you can laugh off a joke, you can let a practical comment go, but when someone starts presenting their love as an invoice, that is harder to put down.
An invoice.
That is what it felt like, not what they said. What it felt like. I did not say that to them. I just got quiet. I am someone who gets quiet when things go somewhere I was not expecting. I have always been that way.
Did the conversations keep going in that direction?
They started to have a kind of shape to them. You know how you can feel when a conversation has a destination? When the other person already knows where they are going and they are just working their way there? I started feeling that. One of them said, at some point, we should probably start thinking about all this before things get complicated. Said it gently, said it like they were doing me a favor. And I thought, who is we? What does complicated mean? And who said anything was going to get complicated? I am a healthy man. I am sitting right here, and somewhere in the middle of a normal conversation, a plan had started that I was not part of.
You were not part of the planning.
I was the subject of it. There is a difference. When people plan with you, they ask. When people plan around you, they just talk until it sounds decided. I had started to feel like the second one. I did not say anything that day either. I just let it move past me. But I remember going home and sitting in that house and thinking, this is mine. I bought this. I have the folder to prove every payment I ever made on it. And somehow I am sitting in it feeling like a guest. That is not a small thing. That is not something you talk yourself out of by morning.
What did you do with that feeling?
I sat with it for a while. I am not someone who acts fast when something is pulling at me. I like to be sure about what I am seeing before I say it out loud. But I kept coming back to the dinner table. That night around the holidays, and then the other conversations, and then the one about figuring things out before they got complicated. And I started to see that it was not separate incidents. It was one thing that had been building. The jokes were not jokes by the end. The practical comments were not just practical. The accounting was accounting. And the planning had started whether I had agreed to it or not. I had not named it yet, not even to myself. But I knew something had shifted between me and my children that I was not ready to let go without a conversation.
Take me back to that dinner then. Not the idea of it. The room itself.
That dinner was not supposed to be anything special. It was just a family dinner. The kind we had done 100 times. Everybody comes in, somebody brings something, we sit around the table. That is what families do. I was not braced for anything. I was just glad to have people in the house.
How did it start?
Slow, the way those things always do. Somebody made a comment, light, almost like they were just thinking out loud. One of them looked around and said something like, "Someday this place is going to be mine." Laughed a little after, the way you do when you want it to land as a joke. And I let it go. You do not want to make something out of nothing at your own dinner table.
But it did not stay there.
No, because then one of the others came back at it, not laughing the same way, more like, I do not know why you would think that, after everything I have helped with over the years. And that was a different tone. That was not a joke anymore. That was somebody keeping a ledger. I heard it and I thought, when did this start? When did my children start keeping a ledger on each other about my house?
What did the table feel like at that point?
Different. I noticed I had put my hand around my coffee cup and I had not moved it. I was just holding it, not drinking, just holding. And I was looking at the table, the wood, the plates, the ordinary things you look at 100 times without seeing them. But right then I was seeing the table like it was something I needed to hold on to. I cannot explain it exactly. It was just that the room had gone somewhere I had not expected, and I was trying to stay steady. Then somebody else said something practical. Something about how much of the place I actually use anymore, whether I needed all of it. And somebody else said, we should probably think about figuring things out before they got too complicated. Those were the words, before things get too complicated.
And where were you when they said that?
Right there. I was right there at the table. Everybody could see me. I had not left the room. But that last part about figuring things out that was said, the way you talk about arrangements, the way you talk about something that needs to be managed, not about a person who is still present and still deciding. I heard myself become a future event in the middle of a family dinner, and I just sat there.
What did you do with that?
Nothing right then. I did not say anything. I did not raise my voice. I think I nodded at something, maybe changed the subject. I honestly do not remember clearly. What I remember is that I was quiet in a different way than I had been quiet before. I have always been someone who does not rush to speak. But that quiet was different. That was the quiet of a man who had heard something he was not ready to answer yet. And after everybody had gone home, I went and sat in the front room. Just sat there in the quiet. The house was still. And I thought about every payment I ever made on that place. Every time I worked late because the furnace needed replacing or the roof needed work or one of them needed something and I made sure it was there. I did not do that so I could argue about it. I did not do that for credit. I did it because that is what you do when you are the father and it is your home and your family is inside it. That is all I was ever doing. And somehow I had ended up on the other side of a conversation I was not invited into about my own house while I was still in it.
You said you noticed your hand around the cup. What did you know in that moment, even if you were not ready to name it?
I knew that the joke was not a joke. I knew the accounting was real. I knew that at least some part of what they were doing was not about me. It was about what comes after me. And I was still right there. I was still their father. I still knew every corner of that house. I knew which drawer sticks and which window lets in a draft and where the extra keys are kept. That house was still mine in every practical and legal sense. But something in the room that night had started treating it like a question waiting to be answered. And I was not the one who was going to be asked.
When you sit with it now, was it really about the house?
No. I knew pretty quickly it was not about the house. A house is wood and walls and a mortgage you paid off. That is not the thing that stays with you. The thing that stayed with me was the feeling that my children had started dividing something up before I was gone. Not the house. Me. My place in things. What I had meant to them and what I would mean now. I was not afraid of what would happen after I was gone. I was afraid they had already started acting like I was. That is a different kind of loss. You cannot put that in a folder.
That is a lonely thing to have to name.
It is. I carried it a while. I am still carrying some of it. But I knew I could not just keep sitting with it and not do something. Because the question under all of it was not what happens to the house. It was whether I was still the one who got to decide what I meant in this family. And that was not a question I was willing to let other people answer for me. For a few days after that dinner, I moved through my mornings the way I always do. Coffee, the paper, a little time outside if the weather was decent. But the feeling did not lift. It just sat there with me, quiet and heavy, like something I had not figured out how to put down yet.
What did carrying it feel like?
It felt like grief, honestly, not the loud kind, the kind where you are still doing your regular things, but something in you knows the world shifted a little bit, and you are not sure it shifts back. I kept thinking about the kids when they were young, coming home from school, dropping their backpacks in the hall, the way the house used to sound when it was full. And then I would look around at the same rooms, the same walls, and I would think, they know this place, they grew up here. And somehow that had turned into something they were measuring instead of remembering.
When you say measuring, what do you mean?
I mean, they stopped seeing it as the place where they grew up and started seeing it as something with a dollar value attached. And that did not come out of nowhere. I understand that. People have mortgages, they have anxieties, they have their own lives and their own financial pressures. I am not naive about that. But there is a difference between understanding why someone does something and being all right with what it costs you.
What did it cost you?
It cost me the feeling that I was still their father before I was anything else. Because what I heard at that table was not, how do we take care of Dad? What I heard was, how do we figure out what comes after Dad? And I was sitting right there. I had not gone anywhere. I was not sick. I was not asking for help. I was just a man at his own dinner table. And somehow the conversation had moved past me without moving me with it.
That is a particular kind of invisible.
It is, and the worst part of it was that they did not mean to make me feel that way. At least most of them did not. I do not think they sat down that night with a plan to make me feel like a future event. But what lands, lands. And what it felt like was that I had already started to become, in their minds, something to be sorted out, not a person to be talked to, a situation to be managed.
At what point did you know you needed to do something about it?
I went looking for something one morning, just a bill I needed. And I passed the shelf where I keep the old house files, the mortgage paperwork, and the early documents, all of it, and I stopped. I stood there for a minute and I looked at that folder. I have had that folder for over 30 years. Every payment, the early ones when money was tight and I was not sure I could hold it together, the later ones when things got a little easier, all of it was in there, and I thought, that is not a piece of property, that is a piece of my life. Every payment in that folder was me making a decision to stay, hold it, to give my children a place that was solid and permanent and theirs. That folder is proof that I kept showing up. And I thought, if my children are going to talk about this house, they need to understand what went into it. Not the numbers, the reasons.
The folder changes what the house means.
It does, because a house is not what you paid for it. A house is what you gave up to keep it, and what you built inside it, and what you meant when you built it. I was not trying to leave my children a property. I was trying to leave them a place that reminded them where they came from and who loved them there. That was the whole point. And somewhere along the way, that had gotten lost.
What did you decide to do?
First thing I did was call an estate attorney. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to cut anyone out or change anything dramatically. I just needed to understand where I stood. Because what I realized was that I had let things remain vague for too long. And vagueness is an invitation for people to fill in their own answers. And when your children are anxious about money, the answers they fill in are not always the ones you would have chosen.
What did the attorney help you with?
Mostly clarity, understanding what I had, what my options were, what my decisions actually were, not what other people assumed they would be. I did not go in there to punish anyone or to set traps or to make a dramatic change. I went in to understand what belonged to me to decide. And what belonged to me to decide was more than I had been acting like it was. Because I had been passive. I had let the conversation happen around me instead of making clear that the conversation needed to go through me. The attorney helped me see that, made some things concrete. We made the papers clear, not cruel, clear. I named what would happen to the house and who would handle things if I could not. Then I wrote something separate, not a legal paper, a letter. My own words, in plain English, about why the house mattered and why I did not want the last thing I gave them to become the thing that divided them. The decisions were on paper now.
How did that feel, having it on paper?
It felt like standing up straight, like I had been slightly hunched for a few months without realizing it, and then I just straightened out. I was not angry anymore. I was not even sad the same way. I just felt like myself again, like a man who knows what he owns, and what he intends and what he is going to say about it. Before I called them, I sat at the kitchen table with that old folder open. Not because I wanted to show them every paper. I did not want a trial. I just wanted to remind myself what I was talking about. There was the payoff letter. There were old notes in my handwriting. There were years in there when I could barely believe we had made it another month. And I put my hand on that folder and thought, do not make this about the paper. Make it about the reason the paper exists. That helped me. Because I knew if I walked into that conversation angry, they would only hear the anger. I needed them to hear the Father.
And then you spoke to your children.
I did. And the next time we sat at that table, I did not wait for the conversation to move around me. I started it. I asked them to come. Not for dinner, not for a casual visit. I told them I wanted to sit down and talk about some things. And I needed them to listen before anyone said much back. That was new for us. I am not typically the kind of father who makes formal announcements. But this was not a regular conversation. I needed them to understand that.
What did you want them to hear?
I wanted them to hear the reasons, not the legal structure, not the division, not the numbers, the reasons, why I built what I built, what I was thinking when I made my decisions, what I want for them, not in terms of what they receive, but in terms of who I want them to be with each other after I am gone. Because that is the thing I am most afraid of. Not the house being sold or not sold or divided or whatever happens to it eventually. What I am afraid of is my children fighting over something I built to hold them together. That is the fear. That is what I was trying to address.
How did they receive it?
Mixed. One of them understood right away, sat quietly, nodded, I could see it landing. One of them got a little defensive, started explaining their position before I had even finished mine. which is fine. I expected that. I was not asking for agreement. I told them that. I said, I am not here for you to vote on my decisions. I have already made them. I am here so that when I am gone, you all know who I was and why I did what I did. I am not asking for your approval. I am asking you to listen. The folder was on the table, but I did not open it.
Yeah.
That mattered to me. I was not there to prove I had paid for the house. I was there to remind them that a person had. One of them started to say, Dad, that is not what we meant. And I believe that, in a way. I do not think they meant to make me feel small. But I looked down at my hands for a second, and I said, I know you may not have meant it that way, but I need you to hear how it landed. Nobody answered right away. That was the first honest silence we had had about it. Not the kind where everyone is avoiding something. The kind where people finally understand that something has been said and cannot just be talked around.
What happened after that silence?
We sat in some silence after. That child did not leave angry, but they did not leave fully settled either. And I am at peace with that. I did not go into that room expecting everyone to walk out feeling good. I went in expecting to say what needed saying. And I did that.
You said you wanted them to remember who you were, not just what you left.
That is the whole thing right there. Because a man can leave behind a house and a will and a folder full of paperwork, and his children can divide it all up cleanly and nobody fights, and they still might not know who he was. They might not know what he wanted for them or what he feared or what he was proud of. And that would be the real loss, not the property, the person. I wanted my children to know the person before they ever had to deal with what the person left. I wanted that while I was still here to say it myself.
You got to say it yourself.
I got to say it myself. That was the thing I could not have said 3 months ago, and I can say now. I was here. I said it. Whatever happens after, they heard it from me. Not from a document, not from a lawyer, from me.
That matters, Gerald.
I waited longer than I should have. Maybe a lot of fathers do. I do not know. I thought the house would speak for itself. I thought the work would speak for itself. But in my house, with my children, I needed to say it before a folder had to say it for me. While I was still here, after that conversation, I went home and sat at the table for a while. Just sat there. The house was quiet. The coffee had gone cold. And I looked around at all of it, the walls, the floor, the light coming through the back window, and I thought, this is still mine, not in the sense of the deed, in the sense that I built a life here. I raised people here.
Did anything feel different after that conversation?
Some things did. Some things did not. A couple of my children came around a little. One of them is still uncomfortable with me. And I can live with that. I am not trying to be right. I am not trying to win anything. But I am not willing to disappear so nobody has to be uncomfortable.
That is an important line.
I still love them. I want that to be clear. This was never about punishing anybody. I do not want them to feel ashamed of themselves. I just needed them to know I was still here, that the house is a home first. It is not just a thing waiting to be divided. It had said enough. I just sat there with my hand near the house key and looked at the room, the same table, the same window, the same old floor. And I thought, I did not build this so it could become a fight. I built it so they would always have somewhere solid to come back to. That was the whole idea.
And do you still feel that?
I do, even after everything. That is the part that surprised me a little. I thought maybe I would feel bitter, but I mostly just feel clear. I know what I want to leave. I know why I built what I built. And they heard it from me, in my own voice. That was what I needed.
I think many people watching today know that feeling. Not the house, not the paperwork. The feeling of being in the room while your future is being discussed without your voice in it. Gerald did not explode. He simply asked to be heard while he could still say it himself. If anything stays with you from his story, let it be this. Your voice should not have to wait for a document. If this story stayed with you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever sat in a room and felt like your future was being talked about without you? You are not alone. And if you know someone who has ever felt unseen inside their own family, This may be a story to share with them. We will be right here with another story about being heard before decisions are made.